Hi everyone, I'm Liz and welcome back to Elizabeth Ann Can Stitch. Hi everyone, welcome to my very first quilt along here on YouTube. I wanted to do kind of a kickoff video to show you what pattern I'm going to be sewing along with all of you guys, and it's a free technique, free pattern, and I want to give you guys a couple of size options and a supply list, and probably share a few of my favorite quilting tools with you. And yeah, just to help everybody get all their supplies together, and then we'll be able to get sewing. Okay, so first let's talk about the quilt that we're gonna be making. I am gonna be using an hourglass block to create a quilt similar to this. This is a quilt that my mom made earlier this year and just finished quilting and binding, and I thought it turned out so cute, and I decided I wanted to make one start to finish and do it along with anybody who wanted to sew one with me. I've had some requests to do more kind of sewing tutorials, quilting tutorials, and I thought it would just be really fun to kind of show a quilt start to finish. This is not a beginner quilt, so to speak. I would say it may be more of an advanced beginner technique just because there are some triangles and matching points involved. I definitely think if you're a beginner who is really comfortable with your sewing machine and comfortable sewing, jump right in. If you're kind of a new sewer and a new quilter, maybe watch all of these end to end and see what you think and try it out. And yeah, give it a go. But I do think this is a more advanced beginner, maybe slightly intermediate technique just because triangles. So the way that I'll be putting together my hourglass blocks uses an 8 at a time half square triangle method, and I'll include a link to what that is below in the description box. Actually, just disclaimer for the whole video, if you're looking for the pattern, the supply list, links to anything I'm talking about, I've put all of that stuff together in the drop-down box so that you can go reference and look at everything I'm talking about here in this video. So I'm calling my version of this pattern the Fat Quarter Hourglass Remix, and that is because I'm going to use fat quarters as my starting point to create these hourglass blocks. And we're going to use 4 different prints in every block. We're going to mix match our arrangement so that everything is kind of random and scrappy and cool by the end of it. I'm really using my mom's quilt as an inspiration for the way I'm doing mine. So I'm going to give you a supply list so you can follow along with exactly what I'm doing, but these techniques are great and can be adapted to any size fabrics you have. You can figure out what size quilt you want to make and create blocks to fit that size. You can really take these techniques and make any size quilt you want, but I'm going to give you the supply list if you want to follow exactly how I'm doing mine. And so the first thing you need is either 20 or 16 fat quarters. I'm going to give you guys instructions for 2 different sizes. So I'm going to do the 20 fat quarter version, which will end up being about 60 by 75, which is a really good small twin to couch sized blanket, but a really nice big, you know, snuggly couch blanket. And then if you have fewer fat quarters or want to make something a little bit smaller, with 16 fat quarters, you can make either a 60 by 60 square quilt or a 52.5 by 67.5, just slightly smaller couch quilt. So I have the instructions for both of those listed down below. Right. And I shared with you guys that I have picked some Americana patriotic colors to do my quilt in. So I have these 2 fat quarter bundles, and I actually have 24 fat quarters here, but I'm only going to need 20 of them. So I'll go through and pair these up and pick my favorites. Okay, so for the rest of the supplies, you're going to need fabric for your backing. You're going to need batting, and you're going to want a neutral thread, sewing machine thread for your piecing. You're also going to want to have some pins on hand, a marking pin, a really nice hot iron, and a few different acrylic quilting rulers. Okay, so I wanted to share with you guys just a couple of my favorite quilting tools. If you are a new quilter and trying to kind of build up your quilting tool stash, maybe this will be helpful, or if any of you just have questions about what I use in my sewing room, I'll share that with you now. I feel like the most important tools for quilting are a really good rotary cutter, rulers, and a cutting mat. So I definitely recommend a self-healing cutting mat that's at least 24 by 36 for this project. You're going to be working with 18-inch squares of fabric, which are really large, and you'll need to be cutting those in multiple directions. So, you know, you'll want at least bigger than an 18 by 18 inch cutting mat, but my favorite size is a 24 by 36. I've also used all kinds of different brands, and I really haven't had an issue with any of the cheaper brands. So in my opinion, I think cutting mats is where you can go to the kind of cheaper end. I mean, maybe don't buy one that's $5 because, you know, what's that gonna do? But I don't think you necessarily have to buy the like $50 cutting mat. There are some quilting supplies where I think the more expensive stuff is worth it. And there's some where I haven't noticed a huge drop off in quality when I buy something cheaper. And I think cutting mat is one of those. So rotary cutters. I do think that on a rotary cutter, the easiest one to use and kind of worth the money is this ergonomic one that has, will have the safety on right now, but when you take the safety off, you just squeeze to expose the blade. And this one's just so easy to use. And if you're cutting a ton of fabric, just spring for the ergonomic one. I do have several of the manual ones and they're totally fine. I just think this one is so much more comfortable and a more natural cutting angle when you're holding it. So that's why I kind of prefer the ergonomic version over just the stick version. But mine are both from Olfa. But again, if you're just buying a basic rotary cutter, I care more about the blades than I do the actual handle. I really only will use the Olfa Endurance blades in my rotary cutters because they're super sharp. They last so much longer than the normal blades. So that's what I buy. They are a little bit more expensive, but they last a lot longer. And with a rotary blade, you just need to kind of keep an eye on it. If it gets a nick in it, it's done. Throw that blade away. So be really careful to not roll over pins or anything, you know, like to make sure that your table is clear right before cutting, because once you get a nick in these blades, then you're just always going to have a skip, you know, in your cut where the fabric's not going to cut all the way through and it's going to make you crazy. So get rid of that blade and get a new one. Okay, so quilting rulers. This is another area where I can say, if you find a cheap one you like, get it. They just are clear acrylic with markings on them, right? So if it's the right size and it's cheaper than another one, grab the cheaper one. So quilting rulers, I mean, some people have 30 or 40 of them, right? They come in every specialty size or shape you can think of. So if there's like a quilt out there that you want to make, I bet there's a specialty ruler to help you make that quilt. With that being said, there are only 2 rulers that I use 99.99% of the time. 2 rulers, and it's a 6 by 24 and a 12.5 by 12.5. These are the 2 rulers that I use for almost 100% of my quilting, and I'll tell you why. So this 6 by 24 is great for cutting strips of fabric. Almost every quilt pattern will have you start with yardage and have you cut it down into strips and then have you cut it down into smaller pieces, right? So a lot of your cutting time when cutting quilting fabric is going to be cutting out strips. And this one is perfect. When you lay it across a piece of fabric that's been folded selvage to selvage, it's about 22 inches long. So this 24-inch ruler is perfect for laying down and cutting long strips of fabric. So that is what I use this one for. And then this square one is my workhorse. This is what I use for everything else. So if you're making 12-inch blocks, great. You have a 12.5 by 12.5 to square it up. But are you making 6-inch blocks, 8-inch blocks? These have all of those markings on them. And I really don't see the need to buy specialty sized square rulers. Maybe if you're making like a postage stamp quilt and you're cutting out hundreds and thousands of 2-inch blocks, you know, maybe that would save your sanity to buy a 2-inch square ruler. But honestly, I have just always used this trusty 12.5 by 12.5 to cut out every small piece of fabric I have ever needed. So when I am cutting out my big long strips of fabric and then subcutting those into my small pieces for a quilt, I start by cutting strips with this and then cutting out the smaller pieces with this. And of course, I will show you my cutting process as we get further into this quilt along. Okay, quilt thread. So I use only 100% cotton sewing machine thread, and my preference is Aurifil. And yes, this is a pricier thread, but I have learned over the last 4 or 5 years of owning my Juki that this is what my machine works best with. I think everybody who has been sewing a long time probably knows what thread they prefer in their machine. So definitely use whatever you and your machine like. Me and my machine, we love Aurifil. Some other ones that I think are 100% cotton and I've used before in my previous machines are the Gutermann that you can find at Joann's. I think Coats & Clark has a 100% cotton version that you can get at Joann's and Michael's. I'm forgetting. I've used Aurifil for so long now that I've forgotten what I used to use. But if you are looking for a thread suggestion, first I say 100% cotton. And if you have some Aurifil, try that out. Or if you know what your machine prefers, use whatever you need. I recommend getting kind of a light to medium neutral. I don't ever use stark white usually in my machine. I usually will use like a cream, linen, gray tone, because when I'm quilting, I quilt with all kinds of different colors of fabric, and I just find kind of a light medium neutral works great to kind of pull everything together. So that's what I keep on hand in my little thread case here, is lots and lots of neutrals in Aurifil. So for making this quilt, there will be a couple of different ways we mark our triangles. And so if you want to use a fabric marker for this process, my favorite one is my AirErase Sew Line marker. There are all kinds of fabric markers out on the market, including friction pens, which I think people love or hate. I have one, I like it, but I still prefer my Sew Line air erasing pen. I'm also going to be showing you a way to mark your fabrics with ironing without even needing a marker. So this is kind of an optional supply list, but I always have this on hand. So you may want to have a marker to keep on hand for this project. Okay, and then you're going to want to also have some sewing pins on hand. I use just these basic yellow ball head sewing, I think they're actually called quilting pins at Joann's or Michael's, and super basic. Again, don't spend a lot of money on pins. You're going to lose them, you're going to bend them, you're going to sew over them. Don't spend a lot of money on pins, but do make sure you get the ones with the ball head, just because they're so much easier to pin and pull out of your fabric than the ones with the little teeny tiny pin heads. Get the ones with the balls on them. Okay, so I think that's everything that you guys need to know about getting started with this quilt. I am actually going to switch you to an overhead view and sort through my fabrics and actually pick my 20 final fat quarters for my version of the quilt that I'm going to be making. And then once I'm done with that, we'll come back and wrap up. Okay guys, let's talk about our fat quarters. And first, I think I'm going to unbundle all of these and kind of group them, because I've got 24 fat quarters here, and so I need to narrow it down to 20. Gosh, these fabrics are so pretty. I'm really excited to get to use these. Oh, especially this plaid. I wonder, I might try to find this for the backing maybe? Oh, it's Newport by Minnick & Simpson. That's what this fabric line is. Cranberries and Cream by Three Sisters for Moda. That is the second fat quarter bundle that I'm using. Oh, this is such a gorgeous fabric. I love a paisley. So I've got some little stacks here. These are all of my darker blues. I've got 2 lighter blues. I've got this pile of mostly red. Even though there's a cream background on some of these, I feel like these are, I'm gonna consider these red. And these I'm gonna consider neutral background, kind of a lighter print. Although, to be honest, this one is pretty colorful, but I'm still gonna leave it kind of with the neutrals. So now what I need to do is start pairing up fat quarters. The way this quilt is made is you pair 2 squares together to make 8 half square triangles at a time. And that really helps kind of cut down some of your sewing and piecing time. And so what I want to do when I'm pairing my fat quarters up is to pair 2 contrasting fat quarters together. I don't want something like this where it's hard to, you know, like they're the same tone of color. I want a really good mix of contrasting pairs. And so I'm gonna start pairing some things up and see where I get. I am looking to make 10 pairs because I need 20 fat quarters to make the size quilt that I want to make. And so even though these are blues, this is a dark blue and this is a light blue on a white base, and I think there is plenty of contrast here. I want to, you know, I'm gonna end up mixing all of these blocks together to create a very random look. So I want a lot of different types of pairings so that when I put the blocks together, there's a really good variety and mix of all the fabrics across the quilt. Okay, yeah, I think I'm good to go. I think this is my 10 pairings, my 20 fat quarters that I'm gonna end up pairing together. And so each of these pairings is gonna give me 8 half square triangles, and each one of those half square triangles is gonna make an hourglass block. So that is how we're gonna end up with our 80 hourglass blocks to put together our full fat quarter hourglass remix quilt. Okay, thanks for joining me today for my Fat Quarter Hourglass Remix Quilt Along Kickoff. Could I have given it a longer title? And I will be filming myself doing all of the steps of this quilt as I work on it over the next several weeks. And so I'll be publishing probably 3 or 4 videos showing the whole process. And I'm hoping to have the first or the next video up all about cutting out your fabrics and prepping to sew the quilt blocks. And I'm hoping to do that sometime over this weekend to post next week. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.